Right. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, whatever you are, and welcome to the webinar on understanding opportunities for diaspora investment, an approach for African governments. My name is Abdul Qadir bin Brahim, and I'll be your host for today. So just to let you know, we'll be starting in just very shortly, in a couple of minutes. So do please stay connected. We'll just give a couple more minutes just for the others to join in. So we will be right back. Okay, hello everyone. So before we begin, I'd like to maybe go through a few housekeeping items for the webinar. So first of all, in order to ensure the highest quality of experience, all the microphones will remain muted during the entire webinar. However, that doesn't mean that you cannot send in your questions. So we do have the chat box feature that is for you to do that, and that can be seen normally on the right hand side of the WebEx session. So you can submit your questions anytime during the webinar. Also, if you want to make sure, please to select the all participants when you're sending down the questions so that everyone could see them. Of course, the slides and the recording of this presentation will be circulated to all attendees, as well as registrants who couldn't attend. And finally, please don't forget to fill in the survey that would appear automatically right after the session in 1 hour's time. So as I mentioned earlier, my name is Abdul Qadir bin Brahim. I'm the financial sector advisor with the Making Finance Work for Africa partnership. I'll be moderating today's webinar. And we're very pleased to have with us two excellent speakers, Leon Isaacs, who is the Chief Executive Officer of DMA Global Limited, as well as Claudia Natali, who is the Senior Labor Mobility and Human Development Specialist at the International Organization for Migration. Both Leon and Claudia are very seasoned experts, and we are very fortunate really to have had worked with them on this project, Diaspora Investment. So perhaps before we dive into the study and the toolkit, what I wanted to do is start off a little bit by setting the scene of the discussion, just to put this discussion into context. So as you know, many African countries face major challenges in securing financing and investment needed to meet the Sustainable Development Goals. And so there are many efforts underway in the quest to secure innovative financing to close this existing financing gap. And also, it's no surprise then that many African countries are increasingly looking beyond their borders to call on an asset that has really supported the continent far more than aid interventions have ever have, and that is really its own people. The African diaspora is one of the largest in the world and continue to make a significant contribution to the socioeconomic development through the transfer of skills, sociocultural influence, and not least through remittances. The latest numbers on formal remittances in 2018 had reached about 86 billion. However, as we know, remittances are sent to families back home for consumption purposes on basic needs. So what we'll be talking about today is really on diaspora investment, and it can take several forms. It could take it includes direct investment, portfolio investment, or philanthropy, for example. And an important indicator to measure these investments is to look at savings. And recent estimates put annual diaspora savings at 30 billion per year. But I feel that probably that is a gross underestimation, and it doesn't really take into account other factors. Includes those savings that are held by multi-generational or historic African diaspora. So there is a lot of potential. However, despite that, we do not currently see many examples of successful diaspora investments globally. Many are quick to point out at the Indian or the Israeli diaspora bond examples to highlight their potential. But in both cases, diaspora was raised in exceptional circumstances, and in both of these countries, they have maintained very, very strong ties with its non-residential population. If we look into Africa, we've seen some diaspora bond examples on the continent, for example, in Ethiopia, in Kenya, in Ghana, but really, it's only in the case of Nigeria where we have seen diaspora bonds oversubscribed. So there are a lot of challenges in mobilizing diaspora investment. A lot of them are related to diaspora engagement. So there is a lack of trust with public institutions that deal with the diaspora. We've also seen that there is a lack of reliable data on individuals and organizations within the diaspora. There's a lack of national policies and strategies on diaspora engagement. And in many cases, the younger and third generation diaspora remains a relatively untapped resource. There are also challenges that are linked to diaspora investment, where diaspora capital are hardly ever harnessed for productive investment and are usually kept in host countries. As I mentioned earlier, there isn't a lot of examples of successful diaspora investment initiatives globally. And for those successful cases, they usually involve a considerable amount of time in planning, product design, and also require a significant amount of resources. And finally, of course, we haven't seen in our research, we haven't seen a lot of actions or tools to really help understand the potential of diaspora investment and also guide governments to design and implement effective diaspora investment mechanisms. And so this was the motivation really behind our study. We talked about so we haven't really seen a lot of successful. We haven't seen a lot any guide or tool to sort of guide governments to design and implement diaspora. We see also a lack of systematic approach to guide the development of diaspora investment programs, and so this really has been our sort of motivation and rationale to do the study. So we've launched a study, I would say, more than a couple of years ago, called a Systematic Approach to Supporting Diaspora Investment. And the objective really is to help countries identify opportunities to boost diaspora investment as a viable source of productive investment in Africa, and also find the best approach for attracting this investment. So what we set out to do is to create a replicable framework for governments to work through, and that can support the development of effective diaspora investment programs, particularly given the specific country context. So looking at the various diaspora investment channel profiles, looking at different types of modalities and interventions. Also, what are the best means of coordination between the different stakeholders, particularly at the national level or at the regional level? And also taking into account the large variations between the different African countries, particularly on the profile of the diaspora and on the legal and regulatory framework. And finally, the study also set out to assess and make recommendations on how donors can most effectively support productive diaspora investment into Africa. So just to go a little bit over our approach and methodology. So the study was funded by the Migration and Development Fund. As I mentioned, we're fortunate to work with DMA Global to undertake the research and the development of the toolkit. So we undertook 4 different phases for this project. The first phase in developing the Diaspora Investment Toolkit, we mapped all the different projects that have been undertaken around the world. I think there were more than 45 or 47 of these initiatives. And then the idea was to sort of see what worked, what did not work, and for those that did not work, what were the challenges that they faced, and for those that worked, what were the key success factors that made it work. And so we went and sought to develop a country-agnostic diaspora investment assessment template. In phase 2, we tested this assessment template in 3 countries, in Ghana, Senegal, and Nigeria. And so the choice of these 3 countries, there was a few sort of analysis and some background work that went into the selection of this choice of countries, and we're happy to share that with you later in the webinar. For phase 3, after the testing, we've produced some results using the Diaspora Investment Assessment template. And based on these results, we provided recommendations both for the individual governments to recommendations on how to set out an efficient or a diaspora investment program that is fit for purpose, and also recommendations for donors, development partners, and also development finance institutions, and how they can best support diaspora investment programs. And phase 4, what we're doing now, is part of the dissemination phase of this work. So in looking at in mapping the various existing diaspora investment projects, we found really 4 broad investment channels, different diaspora investment channels. For the purpose of this work, our focus was really on portfolio investments. So looking at investments through capital markets, with treasury bills, sovereign bonds, diaspora bonds, and also looking at through intermediaries, whether as mutual fund products, impact investment, or private equity. And maybe before I hand it over to Leon, maybe I'll just want to share with you some high-level findings and learnings from really the mapping exercise and the first phase of this project. So what we have found, first of all, is that many designs for diaspora investment programs involved a range of vehicles for tapping pools of diaspora investment, for tapping really diaspora capital. And we found that they were really overly ambitious and complex. And so for us, it's really important that these projects remain, especially the design phase, remain as simple as possible. We've seen funds from diaspora investment projects that tend to be determined by government mostly. On certain occasions, development finance institutions carry some weight in this decision making, but in rare cases do we see the diaspora communities involved in the program. Another important lesson is to really understand the demand from the diaspora. And that is a key point, really. This is also linked with the previous finding, really, that engaging with the diaspora communities is absolutely key to understand the need and expectations. But that, of course, in itself comes with various challenges, particularly related to the cost of marketing. There's also really a better need to understand the capacities of the diaspora to invest. Another key issue that we found was the issue of registering with foreign regulators. And this was really cited as the single largest hurdle when it comes to developing diaspora investment programs. But ultimately, it is unavoidable, really, for governments wanting to attract diaspora organizations that are not financial institutions. It has to build that, it has to be registered with a foreign regulator. And that can be a very costly process. It could also be very highly bureaucratic. However, of course, it does bring in the benefit of credibility as well, which is an important factor when developing a diaspora investment program. We've seen bonds are by far the most popular, and they appear very more prominently than other non-bond vehicles. And also the ability to issue Eurobonds are really really serves as a proxy to be able to do other diaspora-related bonds. Mentioned already that the countries need to also import, and Claudia will talk about that a little bit more, about the importance of making a clear non-financial link to their home country and not looking at the diaspora as simply financial from a financial point of view. We've mentioned the issues of lack of really understanding a lot of what the success generally is. We have seen many initiatives that have fallen short of success, but there's also a general lack of consensus on what success is. We've talked about the issue of data, and finally, the diaspora investors themselves need support throughout the investment process. So I will stop there, and I will hand it over, first of all, to Leon Isaacs to maybe dive a little bit deeper into the diaspora investment assessment process. So Leon, on to you. Hello, Leon. I think you're still on mute. Could you try to unmute your mic?
Hello, is that better, Abdulkader?
Yeah, that's much better.
Hi, sorry about that. Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone on this webinar. It's a pleasure to be able to talk about the whole diaspora investment assessment process. I think that's it. Thank you. Okay, you're continuing to control the slides, so that's great. I'm just going to try and set out relatively high level what has been involved or what is involved in the process that has been developed, and also provide an example of the sorts of findings we've had from one of the trial countries as well. I would say there is a massive amount behind this, and so obviously we're very happy to discuss this with any of you individually or collectively at an alternative time. So to talk about the actual process, and it is a process rather than a one-off activity, is really to look at this chart, and if we work from top to bottom, I think clearly assigning a coordinator and identifying somebody to actually own and drive the process for an individual country is critically important, and is probably the most one of the biggest success factors in making this a useful exercise. So part of what would be done is to obviously set out what the aims are of the overall project, and then the various budgets and resources that are required, with a particular focus on what are we actually trying to achieve. Once we've done that, there is an extensive data collection process that's required. And I think we should just say, as Abdulkader showed earlier, that generally speaking, in the countries we're talking about, there is a lack of data that enables us to fully populate every available variable that we think would be useful to have. And so as a result of that, in some cases, we've had to use proxies and other forms of approximation. But the data falls into, or required falls into, four separate areas really, or we call them pillars. So one is about diaspora engagement, and this is clearly understanding what initiatives have already taken place in the country by the government and other parties to work with the diaspora. And that, you know, that's clearly important in terms of just understanding where they are. And I know that Claudia is going to talk about that further later. But also it's really important to understand the country's attitude to its diaspora and the types of enabling actions it's taken. So having understood a bit about the diaspora, the second pillar deals with the financial profile. So this is probably the sorts of things you would expect, really. But some of it is just what is the financial environment like in the country concerned, and how do the policies of the government actually help in terms of attracting foreign direct investment, or don't they? What are, you know, are there basically things like, is there a stock market in existence? Are there previous efforts made to raise finance from the diaspora and so on? All of these things are really important in trying to build up a picture of what exists, but also helps us to identify what doesn't exist and therefore what steps can be taken to ameliorate that. I think one of the key things in the third box on that side is around what is the government's agenda and goals. You know, that's particularly important in terms of really understanding what are we trying to achieve from this exercise. Then the third pillar is actually understanding much more around the profile of the diaspora. The first part, pillar one, was about how engagement happens with them, but the third part is absolutely critical in mapping out, again, where they are, but also then actually the attitudes and their approach to investment. What are their views of that country? Are they inclined to invest there? What types of things would they like to do? What would need to happen to encourage them to invest more, and so on? And then the fourth pillar is all around donor support, and again, mapping out what is happening there. Partially because, of course, coordination across donors is absolutely critical, but also because we want to make sure that we can leverage any existing programs that already exist. So once the data has been gathered, this is then actually input into quite an extensive template, and then that template will start producing information which then will help us to analyze things. So I don't have time to go into all the details behind that now, but when you see the example we're going to see in a minute, you'll see the types of things that it produces. But it basically will help us to identify what the current state of play is in a country, what the gap between that state of play and where we're trying to get to is, and what steps need to actually take place. So that's what happens in this section. And then, of course, we're not looking at diaspora investment in isolation of other government policy and activities. So we need to then look at what needs to happen in relation to the overall government agenda, and then work out what tools are available either directly to the government or in conjunction with donors that would allow for the development of an appropriate environment for diaspora investment, and then after the environment is in place, actual products and projects that can be introduced. So having got all of that, we then produce a set of recommendations with the priorities. So this acts as a roadmap, and that helps us to quantify the level of effort that's going to be required to take place. And then after we've done all that, of course, we desperately need a monitoring and evaluation process so we can learn from what's happened in that country and apply it both to this diaspora investment process, but also to the future development in other countries. Next slide, please, Abdulkader. So, hello, perfect, thank you. So the next slide I really wanted to show you was a slightly more detail, which you'll see in the little table at the bottom. But as part of this process, as I said before, we're designing programs that actually work for that particular country, not some fancy country. These are very practical solutions for a country given where it is in its development agenda. And the main areas we're looking at, as I've said, is the financial environment, and then this thing which we've not very catchily called the Diaspora Investment Readiness Index, or the DIRI for short, which this basically actually looks at what stage, it measures what stage each country's at, and it looks at specific things around building a profile of the financial environment of a country and then the environment of that country's diaspora. So we're looking at how strong is the financial environment in the country, what is the track record of that country in terms of producing and delivering investment tools, but also looking to make sure there hasn't been or levels of default, or if there has been, what there have been. And then looking at the attractiveness. So is this actually a good deal for the investors, and how does that compare to other countries as well? So we can learn from different countries at different stages. Then for the diaspora, we're very much looking at how able are they to invest? So how much money do they have? How liquid is it? What types of returns are they looking for, and so on? And then, as importantly as do they have resources, is are they actually willing to invest in the country in question? So this is all of this side, and I think couldn't emphasize this enough from what we've learned in doing the trials, is that it's absolutely essential to try and understand the investors or the potential investors. So what we would call demand side research is absolutely critical. So having got all of that, that's basically in 10 minutes what takes considerably longer to actually undertake as a process. I wanted to now just show you an example. Basically, this would be part of the output that is provided to a country, and this is the sort of thing we produced for the trial. So you can see there's a series of scores and indicators there. Some of it is the basic information that one would collect about a country and its general macro readiness for investment or its positioning, some of its history, some of the financial infrastructure. And then if you look in the middle, you'll see something that says the Diaspora Investment Readiness Sub-Indexes. So these are scores that have been developed from the different data that's been collected, that's been sorted, and then been weighted by order of importance. And you can see that in this case, the yellowish box gave an overall score of all of those of 13.9 out of 25. So just over halfway from the perfect score. What that does is that enables us to then look at where there are gaps, and you can see from the sub-indexes above the sorts of areas we're looking at. Each of those scores, 2.3, 2.8, 3.1, and so on, is out of 5. So you can see actually that some of them, particularly the first pillar 1, the financial profile, is actually probably the areas where it's much easier for the government to, or for us to be able to identify the types of things governments might need to do to improve their financial profile. The second area around the diaspora profile is much more on the demand side, and that's going to be a different set of tools and approaches that are needed to try and address the gap there. But overall, this just shows what might need to be done to actually develop, or gives a score that shows what needs to be done to develop improvements. And then we can use this score actually to compare different countries. So we can then start looking for, well, if this country had a similar score, what is the approach they took, and can we apply that here? So if we just go to the final chart, and that I'm going to talk about anyway, and I apologize, that is a very messy, busy chart. Abdul Qadir, thank you. This is just trying to sort of summarize the types of things we're getting out and producing as a result of this approach. So there's a series of recommendations around the diaspora policy itself. There's profiles of the diaspora. We've got profiles of the financial structures in the country, and then all the different areas that I've talked about, really. And for each of these, there will be a set of recommendations on what would be recommended to happen in order to make the country ready to attract diaspora investment, or hopefully there's already ticks in those boxes, so it's actually what type of products and what types of considerations in designing those products are most appropriate. And then you'll see in the bottom right box something around the donors. So again, profiling what's happened, but also making recommendations for donors to consider in how they can help the country to get to the next stage in its role for diaspora investment. So I'm going to stop in a moment and say, I know that's very high level. Obviously, Abdelkader is going to talk about the guidance that's been produced that is publicly available for people to look at. And what I'd really emphasize is that the process has delivered so far a sort of consistent approach across borders that really enables a strong measurement of a country to understand its current situation and how it gets from where it currently is to where it wants to get to in terms of diaspora investment. So I might stop there in the interest of time. And Claudia, I guess can I hand over to you?
Thanks, Leon, and good afternoon, everybody online. Hi, AK. So I'll move now onward, providing an overview of what IOM approach to diaspora engagement is. So maybe I'll zoom out a little bit more from what Leon has just done. And I will spend a few minutes going through our 3 E's approach. 3 E's as in enable, engage, and empower. On this slide, you'll see like bullets about what enable is, which is reducing obstacles for participation, integration of diaspora, and I'll explain in a minute with a few more detailed information what we mean. Then the second step that we take when we want to engage with diaspora, we call it actually engagement with diaspora, and it's really reach out and understand the diaspora. Leon touched on that because it's clearly linked to also the work on diaspora investment that has been done. And finally, our third step is called empower. And that's where we really want to make or support diaspora to be agents of development. If we pass to the next slide, I will just spend a moment to explain the enabling, which is the first step of the 3E strategy, that approach that we have. So enabling, it's really creating the conditions that will allow transnational communities to contribute to development. So we basically start from the understanding that if we want to collaborate and partner with diaspora, those individuals and groups need to feel, on one hand, integrated in a country or in a society, and also they need to be able to participate. So for example, issues related to socioeconomic participation, like access to healthcare, employment, social protection, and we listed quite a few here on the slide, or also civic and political participation, providing flexible citizenship, residency, visa requirements, are all steps and actions that can be done to put the person or the group in a condition to be able, it's a ground level point that allow the individuals to be able to even think of potentially contributing to their home countries. This is regarding participation. Of course, also integration in countries of destination, it's very important, and that can be done through ensuring provision of public service. That we listed also country of origin there, because we have to keep into account that these communities are transnational, therefore they do live in a country of destination oftentimes, that they come back to their countries of origin also often, and that's why flexible citizenship can also facilitate their participation and integration in a society. Communication campaigns are all types of actions that IOM propose and promotes to really create this enabling environment for diaspora to become an agent of development. Now, the second step, once we have enabled, we've created these conditions for diaspora to be able to contribute. Our second step is what we call engagement. When we say engagement, we really wanna know who the diaspora, who is our diaspora. So in order to be able to talk to them and to get to points, to really understand each other and find a common point of contribution to the country of origin, if you want, we need to know who the diaspora is, what their interests are. And so under this engagement step, we have maps and profiles. So we develop, and also the reaching out. So I'll explain a bit. So first of all, we want to know who is part of this diaspora. And so we map them, or we develop profiles, and I'll explain in a bit what can be the methodologies. But in order to ensure that this mapping and these profiles are actually really comprehensive, we have to create trust with these individuals and groups. Without trust, without this reach out, dialogue, communication, it will be very difficult to actually get to know who the people are. So that's why we really recommend that whenever a profile or a mapping is done, the very first step is creating this dialogue with the groups in the countries of destination. Now, one thing that needs to be really clear from the outset when we want to do a mapping is what is the purpose? Why are we doing that? What are we trying to map? And as Leon was saying, you know, for investment, if you want to promote diaspora investments, clearly there's some specific information we want to gather. And I think Leon covered them fairly well. But also we want to understand the propensity maybe of the individuals or the groups to contribute financially to their countries of origin, their ability to be able to do that. That's one thing. But then if we want to engage, and if our objective is more philanthropic, or if we want to promote skills transfer type of projects, and I will explain, I will give an example in a minute, then of course the type of mapping, the type of questions that we will ask, they will be different. We maybe want to know what sectors these diasporas are engaged in, are working in the country of destination, and so on. And then, of course, the methods and can be qualitative or quantitative. Generally, when we construct diaspora profiles, we want to keep a more quantitative approach, trying to really have numbers and trying to understand the spatial distribution of diaspora, socioeconomic, demographic, migratory profile, and so on. But then when it's about perception and willingness, again, to contribute to some sort of programs, then we want to have a more qualitative type of approach. So this was for the engagement step. So it's really knowing the diaspora. Now, once we have creating the enabling conditions, as we said, then we have information about who the diaspora is, then we can move on and empower. So it's the 3 E's is empower. So really making the diaspora agent for development. This can be done in different ways, either through funding, capacity building, networking, and I will show a networking platform that IOM helped developed, iDiaspora, but it comes just in a few slides. So what IOM has been done for a long time, and I think we really have quite a strong experience, is facilitating the transfers of skills and resources. Now, Abdelkader at the beginning was also underlining the fact that contribution of diaspora is not just financial, but can also be in terms of skills. But of course, it can be resource transfer, entrepreneurship. This can be done through financial and technical assistance. So I now, since we covered pretty well the financial contribution and how we can get there, I will just spend a few. I want to provide you with an example of what IOM does in terms of transfers of skills. So I chose an example from Sierra Leone. And in the next slide. So in Sierra Leone, IOM has worked with the diaspora. It was just in the aftermath of the Ebola crisis, which left the country really with a health sector very weak. There was depletion of skills and competencies in the health sector. I mean, not to forget that the country was coming out of a civil war, I mean, a few years back before, but it was starting to get back on its feet, and then Ebola struck again. So what we did was working with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, of course, in Sierra Leone and their diaspora office, and we helped them identifying skills and competencies specifically in the health sector abroad. We did a mapping. So in this case, we did a mapping in the US to identify where and what type of health competencies were among the Sierra Leonean diaspora. And then we supported those who were interested in coming back to their own countries and contribute to return temporarily and provide, for example, free medical. Under the program, we were able to provide free medical services. These were all provided by diaspora members. So going in the details, you know, there were 150 surgical cases, 48 dental services. So that tells us that we were able to identify dermatologists, dentists, surgeons, and so on. Of course, according also to the needs in the country, and that was done really with the government in Sierra Leone. Another example, the same diasporas who returned were able to contribute to the World Diabetes Day campaign. And through that, people were screened in their villages because these diasporas came, but were really mobile. They were not just staying in Freetown. They really went to remote areas where health systems were even weaker. And so many of the local people and population really benefited from health consultation. Then in the next slide, there's a few more not examples, but as part of the program. AK, you can go on the next. So the same, through the same program, we also sensitized local health workers, so nurses and also local authorities personnel. We were working with school children as well. Oftentimes, and not necessarily under this program, but oftentimes through this diaspora return of skills program, we also conduct training of trainers with the local with the local individuals, so that the skill that has been transferred stays, and for sustainability issues reasons, they can be retained for a bit longer in the country. And then again, also under this project, we conducted outreach activities. And for example, 6 rural peripheral health units were renovated. We provided medical, I say we, but in fact it was the diaspora. IOM was really just the broker, if you want, that helped making this connection between the communities abroad and their countries of origin. So this was just to give you an idea of the breadth of type of activities that, when we talk about diaspora engagement and empowering, really are involved, in addition to diaspora investments, of course. Now, the next slide shows the iDiaspora. I mentioned before that to empower, we really want to create networks and providing capacity building. So the iDiaspora website was created with the support of IOM, to really be a platform where diaspora members from different countries can get in touch, share experiences, get to know about diaspora strategies or programs that exist in other countries, get ideas back to their own countries of origin. And it's really an interactive platform. That doesn't mean that this iDiaspora website substitute any diaspora websites, but the idea is really that it serves as a platform to bring all together. And so if there's a diaspora website in Sierra Leone, which there is, and we supported their development, then it can be linked up to iDiaspora website, so that we really create a repository as well of knowledge and information on this. matter. Now, just to end, I just thought of summarizing a couple of lessons learned from the years that IOM has been working on diaspora and diaspora engagement. So as I stressed during the presentation, knowing who your diaspora is key. And if we link it to promoting diaspora investment, that's clearly, that's a key point. We cannot hope to promote diaspora investments without knowing who the diaspora is. Hence, mapping and profiling, it's really important. Now, in terms of mapping exercises, we conducted several over the years, in fact, a lot. And we also have some lessons learned from how to conduct it. I've listed them here on the slide, but just to pick a few. So first of all, and it sounds maybe very banal, but the objective of the mapping should be really clear and well thought. Because of course, you can, whenever you want to map a diaspora, you won't map everything. So that's why, again, it's the question as to why you want to map, why you want to do this profile. It's really important, and that should be linked to your final objective. So if it's financial contribution and investments, the questions and the type of methods that you use will differ. So really, really important. It's important also to remember that diaspora is not an homogeneous group. And so very important to try and find measures to reach invisible or marginalized groups, which are still part of the diaspora, because otherwise we risk to have a mapping which is very partial and of a group of a diaspora, but it doesn't represent necessarily the whole group. It's important to involve diaspora members. So whenever we do have results, it's important to share them with the diaspora community to get feedbacks. And this is all part of the building trust that I talked about just a few minutes ago with diaspora. It's like really ensuring that they are partners. And here I go already to my third lessons learned. So diaspora should be seen as a partner, is known and consulted throughout the whole process. This is something we learned, programs, even the one skill transfer, for example, that I showed in Sierra Leone, it can work as long as we have created all the groundwork before. We created trust, we talk to diaspora as partners, and the trust, of course, which came under two, is a really another key point that I think it's never enough stressed. It's a building block to develop successful diaspora investment programs as well, because here the focus is on investments. But without these three ingredients, I think it's going to be very difficult to build up whatever we have, even if we have a fantastic toolkit. And here I'm saying that this because we can really be complementary with what Leon has mentioned and this part. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leon, and thank you, Claudia, for your contribution. And thanks, Leon, first of all, for really going in depth into the investment assessment template. I know that we do not have a lot of time for this webinar session to go into greater detail. So I invite everyone, just a reminder, once this webinar session ends, you'll be taken and directed to our Making Finance Work for Africa website, straight to the actual publication, which is a toolkit. It comprises of a 5-part handbook and then the Diaspora Investment Assessment Template. So I invite you all to just have a look at the investment assessment template and the toolkit, and just so that you can have an idea of how it works. And I think within the next webinar session that we might organize is really to go in depth into in how to use the handbook. I just also want to thank Claudia for her contribution. We at Making Finance, we really believe that diaspora investment initiatives should be multidimensional, it should be multifaceted, and it really requires an understanding of diaspora beyond a financial instrument. So I think it's important that we look at relations between the country and the diaspora, and really try to improve the trust, because this would be key. And that's why in our toolkit we really stress on the importance of the diaspora engagement component, as well as really knowing your diaspora, because without these two elements, we do not see a successful diaspora investment program. So I think what we'll do now is we will open up to the Q&A session. So I want to invite you all to send in your questions via the chat option. Maybe before, just to give, maybe we'll give a little bit more time for the participants to send in their questions. As they do that, perhaps Leon, I'll come to you, and I'll just ask you a quick question myself. So we've both been involved in the development of the toolkit, and our hope is that this could be used really to assist countries develop a diaspora investment approach that is really fit for purpose. So could you perhaps maybe talk a little bit of how you view what do you think is considered a good approach for a successful diaspora investment program, and how can this tool that we've developed help in that regard?
Okay, thank you, AK. Just to advise you, you may hear a lot of noise that's not from me in a minute. We apologize for that. The place has become very noisy. But just to really say, I think in terms of the key things that one needs, the first part is really buy-in from the highest level of government possible. You know, one of the things that we often see is people talk about diaspora investment as a generic term, but they don't really go further to understand what it actually is and how it could come about. So I think the first thing is to get the highest level of government buy-in, hopefully from the president down. I think secondly is to really be clear about what the goals are. And it's not really a tool which you often see at the moment, which is to say we want to issue a diaspora bond. It's very much more around, we'd like to engage with the diaspora. We'd like them to help us develop our country further and invest there. How can we do this? And I think it's the how part rather than the what part with a particular tool in mind that's absolutely critical. So I think it's really understanding that approach of to what is possible now and what needs to happen. So you get the highest level of buy-in, you appoint a senior person or team to actually implement or to look at this whole area. And then the next step is really to be as methodical as possible in following the template, using the handbook that has been done, to really assess where you are. And then from that, obviously involving all the relevant stakeholders at as early a possible stage as you can. And then I think the final thing that we've all said, but is still absolutely key, is know your diaspora, really understand them and listen to what they're saying. I think what was interesting is one of the findings when we looked at the other programs that have been taken out, that have been undertaken so far, is that nearly all of the diaspora investment programs were targeted or driven by government in terms of what they wanted investment in. There was very few examples of where this is actually something that the diaspora either wanted or wanted investment in. And I think that was one of the reasons why a lot of the schemes didn't succeed as much as we would have liked. So for me, understanding the diaspora and what is driving to them, listening to them, is the most critical point. And then, of course, coming out with a series of recommendations that are practical and workable, and as with most projects, that you can identify some low-hanging fruit, so you can do some simple things quite quickly and start building up trust in all the stakeholders that actually this is a program that can succeed and will deliver on its objectives. Hopefully that's enough for now on that one, AK.
Great, thanks, Leon. we're getting in quite a few questions, so let me go through them. So there's a question on whether we're willing to share our experiences with the IMF, World Bank, DSA. So I imagine this is the debt sustainability analysis, as well as the rating agencies for diaspora bonds in euros or local currencies. And then follow-up question, does the DERI cover all 54 African countries? So I think to respond to the first question, I mean, what we have done, and as Leon just mentioned, we have piloted the template in 3 countries, and we've sort of the 3 countries, Ghana, Senegal, and Nigeria, were chosen based on their experience, their financial profile, and also their level of engagement with the diaspora communities. And so I think the next step for us is really to get buy-in of these results that from the government and the different stakeholders of these countries. However, of course, we're open to work with other countries, and we're not restricted to just these 3 countries. I mean, the whole point of the Diaspora Investment Toolkit and assessment template is to really help all countries in Africa to develop diaspora investment programs. So yes, I mean, we're willing to share some of the experiences. And of course, I mean, the rating agencies are key. And just, if you look at just the Nigerian example, for example, I think the Fitch rating has given it a B+ on their diaspora bonds, and that is due to many factors, of course, looking at long-term foreign currency, looking at the macroeconomic factors, the financial factor as well. And it's also worth pointing that the Nigerian example, there was a lot of roadshows that were made in the diaspora communities in North America in particular through the investment banks. So yes, the credit rating agencies are key. The Diaspora Investment Readiness Index could be applied, so it is just a component of the assessment template, and perhaps Leon could elaborate a bit further on that, but the idea is to apply it in any country, and this will present a grade that will sort of measure the readiness index, and to be able to compare that with other countries. Could you maybe elaborate just a little bit more, Leon, on the DERI tool and what's the purpose of it?
Yeah. Am I live?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yes, thanks, AK. I know we're a bit short of time, but you know, the main purpose of the DERI tool within the overall process is really to identify, and it can be used in any of the countries, is to identify exactly how ready, as in the name, how ready a country is to be able to undertake diaspora investment. But it's actually more about trying to work out, is it in a position to do any form of diaspora investment? If not, what are the next steps? Or if it is ready to do diaspora investment, which products is it ready to do? And which ones are going to be the ones that are most appropriate for that country and for that diaspora? So it's very much a tool that, by following a systematic approach, we can understand what is going to work for an individual country, rather than applying a blanket approach. And apologies for the brickworks in the background.
Yeah, thank you. The brick, that's we can hear you clearly, thank God. So it's not too bad. You sound good in the webinar. Thanks, Leon, for this. So other questions, we'll try to answer them as much as we can with the little time we have. As we said, in terms of 2020, we're looking to generate more government buy-in on the stakeholders, and also test the toolkit in other countries, and that certainly includes countries in the Maghreb, Algeria, Tunisia, and Morocco. Particularly Morocco, we view it as a very interesting, and it was one of the shortlisted countries, in fact, that we wanted to test the toolkit, given the investment climate and the enabling environment and their engagement with the diaspora. Absolutely, we're open to looking to expand the test to the Maghreb region. Perhaps, Claudia, come to you. Could you sort of, there's a question on the diaspora, and so it doesn't seem that there are many people registered. What are the plans for the diaspora to expand its user base? Hello, Claudia, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So I was saying thank you for the question, and yes, confirming that indeed the iDiaspora is in its infancy, if we want. I mean, it started already a year and a half ago or so, but we are really working now as much as we can, as hard as possible to promote it. I mean, iDiaspora, as any platform, is as good as it's used. And so we are doing a lot of work of trying to promote it with the different diaspora groups and governments. IOM, as you've seen, IOM logo is not even there because what we want is for the iDiaspora to become an independent or like platform, but we are indeed still behind trying to also look for additional funding to launch it and to ensure that it can be expanded and so on. So it's all work in progress.
Great, thank you. We'll probably maybe try to extend this, give it 5 more minutes to just give a chance to answer some of the questions. So just as a reminder, yes, you should receive the slides and the audio of this webinar in a separate email. In terms of the involvement of perhaps maybe I'll link up 2 questions. So whether there's a question on whether the research was based on identifying small scale or large scale initiatives, and also given the fact that there are lots of initiatives, but of course mostly small scale. And that is very true. There's mostly small scale initiatives. In our research, for the purpose of this research, we mostly looked at investments from a portfolio perspective. So looking at bonds and looking at other capital market instruments, looking at also other products such as mutual funds or private equity and venture, well, to a certain extent venture capital, but I'm not sure if venture capital is part of that, but certainly more larger scale projects that can really fill or close the financing gap of a specific country. So that was the focus of this project. Can we link the development efforts through the partners to the diaspora effort to avoid overlap? Perhaps Leon, a question on linking development efforts to the diaspora effort. I suppose it depends on the country, and to your experience, to what extent do you see country strategies or sort of development programs, agendas include diaspora investment in their agenda or in their strategy? Have you seen that in your experience engaging with African governments?
Hello? Can you hear?
Hello, Leon. Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I was just trying to look for the question in the list of questions here, but I mean, I think we have seen a lot of countries that talk about diaspora investment, but I think what we then see is it means different things to different countries. And often when they talk about diaspora investment, as I said before, they're very much in mind a particular solution. So the diaspora bond is clearly the one that comes up most. Whereas I think part of the purpose of this is to really start maybe developing a set of common understandings about the types of things that need to be undertaken for the whole diaspora investment side. And I think, part of what we were looking at we were trying to control the scope of this project as well to relatively large government driven initiatives. So that's not to underestimate private sector diaspora investment initiatives, which we know in many countries are quite organized. So I know it's a bit of a long-winded answer, but really to say we've seen a lot of interest and a lot of discussion, but we haven't seen a lot of consistency so far. And I think that's what hopefully this type of approach can do, is to frame the discussion in a much more disciplined and focused way, so we can hopefully achieve strong results, but also that countries don't have to reinvent the wheel, which is very much one of the key drivers for this, is what can we learn from other countries in similar situations on what needs to be done. And also, to be honest, are there economies of scale? I mean, there are so many questions out there, particularly around the diaspora's willingness to invest, and whether they are only interested in investing in their country of origin, actually whether they're only interested in investing in the region they come from their country of origin, or are they interested in much broader investment opportunities in the same areas as, say, the RECs in Africa, or actually in the whole of Africa as well. So I think we've probably raised more questions than we've answered, but hopefully what we're seeing now is a more focused discussion around diaspora investment generally.
Great, thanks. And I think just to answer some final questions here, we have studied, have you studied past diaspora programs such as the Development Marketplace for African Diaspora? I don't recall if we have, but we can certainly check. There are a lot of initiatives, about some 50 of them that we've looked at in our mapping exercise. So we can probably reach out to you directly to let you know if we have included this program as part of our mapping exercise. And then finally, again, so we haven't had any experience yet. We haven't looked at diaspora investment challenges in North Africa. What you will see in the toolkit are some lessons and recommendations. I believe that is the fifth handbook, the fifth book on what we have, some of the recommendations and some of the lessons from our pilot experiences in Ghana, Nigeria, and Senegal. However, of course, we are looking to expand, rolling out the toolkit to other countries, and certainly some countries in North Africa will be part of that as well. So I think I'll end it there. Thank you all for your questions. Just as a reminder again, so once this webinar ends, you will be directed to our webpage, where you will be able to download the toolkit and the investment assessment template. So I invite you all to take a look, and if you do have any questions, here are our contact details. Feel free to reach out to us directly. We'll be happy to collaborate, answer any questions you might have on this topic. So I think I'll end it there. Thank you very much, Leon and Claudia, for your contribution, your participation. I want to thank you also, all the participants, for joining in and for your showing interest on this subject. So please stay tuned to other future Making Finance Work for Africa webinar sessions. As a reminder, we do have a survey that will pop up right after this session. So I invite you all to please give your honest assessment on this webinar session, and also make recommendations for any future topics. Thank you all again for your participation, and I wish you all a pleasant day, evening, wherever you are. Goodbye.